Welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. Today we are joined again by Emma. Emma was on one of the earlier episodes as a PDI and has kindly come back to talk about her life now as an ADI. We spoke about a lot of different topics from her part 3 to leaving a franchise and going independent, and some of the struggles she's faced since becoming a qualified driving instructor. If you're enjoying the episode, please make sure that you give it a like and leave any thoughts that you've got in the comments. If you haven't already, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any episodes as they go live. You can also follow us and interact on Facebook, whether that's in the group or on the Facebook page, and they're both available at Mirror's Signal Podcast. If you're watching this as it goes public, I'm now also uploading all of the previous episodes onto Spotify. So all episodes will be available in audio format over on Spotify. But for now, if you want the latest episodes, they're available in audio format on YouTube Music. So before we get on with the episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, give the episodes a like, a comment, and I hope you all enjoy. Emma, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. For those that missed it, you was on what, around episode 14, I think it was. So quite early on we was talking to you.
Yeah.
And at the time you was a very brave PDI coming on to the podcast to talk about being a driving instructor.
Yeah,
How's it gone
I
since then?
was. I mean, definitely not as easy breezy as I was planning on it. I had a major case of the instructor blues. Um, but I'm getting there, slowly but surely. It's becoming fun again.
So before we talk about kind of the instructor blues, because that was what we was talking about for this episode a little bit.
Mhm.
How was your part 3? You came on and spoke to us before you'd done it. How did it go?
Yeah. Oh, it was so hard. I honestly didn't sleep for the day before. Then the examiner walked out, and truly, I thought I was going to vomit. I was like, this poor examiner, he's going to be covered in my goo in a second. And we sort of introduced ourselves, and he was nice, but examiners are a bit scary. So he got in the back of the car. I think originally we were doing planning and awareness with an extra focus on eye scanning because that was really where we needed some work. And it was a learner that I hadn't even worked with for a while. I think she'd had like one lesson before. And as we got going, we probably like 5 minutes into the test, had a bit of a boo boo at a mini roundabout where she stopped for everyone. So we were like, okay, this is time to adapt. So we spoke about that, sort of how many times, like, do you feel like this is something we need to work on more? Or was it just a brain fart? And she was like, no, actually, I think we need to do some work. And we sort of went through that. She did fabulously. One of the things that really got to me was the fact that we took a wrong turn and we went down a road that I'd never been on. And truly, like, I was already having a meltdown. And when I saw this road, I was like, Lord, help me. Lord, help me. And then thankfully, we got through, got to the test center. I was convinced I'd failed. And if I hadn't have failed, like, it would have been a scrape through. And we got to the test center and he took so long. Like truly, I think we were waiting for like 10, 15 minutes before he came back. And then he told me I passed, had a score of 35. There were lots of little things I could work on. But truly, I think it was just my goal initially was the fact I know I struggle with nerves. So I just wanted to be so good in my regular lessons that coming on my part 3, I can scrape through because failing was not an alternative. I would have quit. I truly couldn't have put myself through that again, ever. Standards check I can deal with, but another part 3, I honestly don't think I could have done that. Just like the idea of having to do it so soon after like failure. couldn't have done it. It was all or nothing.
How did you manage after it then? Because you put a lot, I know you put a lot of pressure on for the part three, and a
Mhm.
very brief breakdown of it there that you kind of had to adapt and work with the student, and it was someone that you hadn't worked with much before. But
Mhm.
how was it once that was done and you're now an ADI?
It was bliss right away. I was very, very happy. And then bliss ended real quick. Literally, I think like the week after, I was like, what's next? What is next? I am a what's next kind of person. I hate being content because that doesn't work for me. And then I was sort of like, well, I can't be an instructor trainer right away because like I need some experience first. So I was like, there's not anything that's like very obvious as the next step. And then I had a string of fails. And truly, I was like, great, I've qualified for what? I'm clearly a shit instructor. Like, no one's having a good time. I'm certainly not having a good time. My learners keep failing. And it was just a crisis there for a moment. And then as I was sort of in the middle of my crisis, as one would do, I gave myself another one by going independent. Like literally, I think 3 months after qualifying, because why wouldn't you do that when you're already drowning? So that sort of gave me even more stress because I had like a debilitating fear, which I suppose I still have, of not being the best. Like I want to be the best. That's always going to be the goal. And I'm a very little fish in a pond of big fish. And sort of navigating that. And I think also with my mom being my driving instructor, I've never had a proper driving lesson. So a lot of it was sort of guessing and hoping for the best. And I think probably if I'd had more experience seeing other lessons, that I'd be a bit more comfortable, but I just wasn't at the time. And then, you have all these learners putting trust in like your school and your name, and it's stress. It is stress. And I had no idea how to run a business. And that's also stress. That's hard work. But, but I'm sort of figuring it out slowly but surely. And just asking as many people as I can for help, to be honest.
There's a few things there that we can talk about that I think will help people that are early on in their journey, either just
Mm-hmm.
qualified or they have their part three coming up. But the first thing that I'd like to ask you about is how did you cope with the run of fails? Because I know myself, I've had a run.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to kind of get through it, but how did you manage?
I didn't. I did not at all. Truly, I I'm a quitter. I don't have any of that like, oh, I need to prove people wrong. I have none of it. I have quit everything that I'm not good at by like it takes me a second. I'm like, nah, this is it. Don't want to do it. And I was kind of like, great, I've been qualified for like 2 months. Everyone's failing. Why should I be an instructor? There's no need for me to be an instructor, clearly. And then for the first time in my life, I've not wanted to quit because I was playing with the idea of quitting, and then I was like, but actually I do like my job. I was like, but why isn't it going my way? What can I do to get better? And I honestly think that the big thing for me is the fact that when I had my first one, I think I got in a very negative mindset and I sort of expected everyone to fail, which you're not going to have learners who succeed if you don't think they'll succeed, right? And I think just because I had that mentality, I sort of probably rubbed off a little bit on my learners. And then it just ended up being this negative cycle. And it wasn't good. I was not coping. And then I went independent and had my first pass afterwards. And it was my part three learner. Bless her heart, she did so well. I cried like a baby when she passed. She did too. The examiner was like, I'm the only one not crying. I was like, yeah. And then once I sort of got that pass, and that was like the first time that I went independent, I was like, you know what? Maybe I can make this work. And she had failed in the past, and she was like, yeah, I was just saving myself for when you went independent. I was like, yeah, I hear you. I respect that.
How did you change that mindset from the negative mindset to approaching the test with a positive?
I'm not sure I have, to be honest. I am still very negative, but I think what it's done is that I'm a little bit more hesitant in taking learners to test. I think that I wasn't necessarily setting really high standards to my learners. So most people that I sent for tests could pass, right? And I think now I'm more at the point where it's like, no, they will pass. Like if they don't, I'm gonna be shooketh. Um, and I think that's like been the big difference that I'm getting a little bit better at holding people back. And I think that was a problem as well, which was one of the reasons why I felt overwhelmed because I thought it was so hard holding people back when someone would come and they were like, I booked my driving test. And I was like, you're not ready. And then I would just feel really, really guilty. And a lot of the time, I would have parents making me feel guilty, and they'd be like, but we pay you to take her to test. And I was like, that's not really how it works. So I think getting more like comfortable with like setting those boundaries. And I'm sort of trying to do so much training that I feel quite confident in my decisions. Because where I've always been like, oh, but what would everyone else do? I'm now sort of falling back on like the knowledge I have. And I mean, I drive quite well, so I do have knowledge. I just need to get a bit better at trusting myself. But that's a work in progress.
I think that is one of the challenges, isn't it? And what you said there is really interesting is they can pass.
Mm,
And I think when I had my run of fails, there was a few bits going on, but I think I was probably guilty of the same thing. It's like they could pass, and I don't mean kind
mm,
of just on a good day. Like they're all right drivers. They're pretty good, and
yeah.
they could pass a driving test. But it is very much now. It's like you're going and you will pass. That's the
Mm,
level that I'm looking for with them is I know they'll pass. And if they do fail, it's going to be a surprise.
yeah.
And there's so much that affects it at the moment, I think, because of the test waiting times and
Mm,
the pressure that is on a test day and the fact that someone might have had a test booked and then it's next month and we're like, we're still
yeah.
not ready. So can we do an extra couple of lessons? And I'm now more confident with where that cutoff is. It's like if you're not
Mm,
test ready by this point, you can't do your test that's 3 or 4 weeks later, rather than
yeah.
trying to cram a few extra lessons in the last 2 weeks building up to a test. And I don't know whether it's right or wrong. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. But I kind of find myself now, the last 2 or 3 lessons are
Mm,
not about their driving or about learning anything. It's about mentally preparing for the driving test, opposed to
yeah.
still learning things and hoping that they've got it by test day.
Mm. No, I completely agree. And I think as well, it's just there's a reason we qualified. And I think we need to get a bit better at trusting ourselves. And for me, one of the big things that kept me from refusing people to test was the fact that I don't want to come off as a money grabber because that's not the case. It's not because I want more money. It's because truly, like, I don't want you to die as the first thing you do when you pass your test. And sort of getting to that point where I was quite comfortable having that conversation about like, this isn't about money. You can practice at home, but this is the standard that you need to be at. And right now, we're not there. And that's not because I'm trying to be mean. It's because I want you to have a long, safe life of driving. That's what we want. But it's hard sometimes. It's easier. We're easier with some, and then harder with some.
It's a really difficult conversation to have, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I had it a few weeks back, one with a young lad who's not gone
Mm,
on to do his test yet because he's had some time away, and one with a lady as well. And she was like, I think I'll pass. And she was like, if I just
mm,
go and have a go. And one of the things I found myself saying to her was, it's not about what happens if you fail. We'll do much. I'm like, what happens if you pass? You're not
mm,
ready and you might pass, but what happens after test when you're driving on your own? And
yeah.
that seemed to change the conversation slightly. It's no longer you're
Mm.
not ready for a driving test. It's are you ready for driving on your own? And I knew she was going to have
Yeah.
some long commutes as well and drive in a lot of different towns. So it's like,
Mm.
what happens if you pass? And
Yeah.
she kind of got on board after that. She was like, okay, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. See, I've tried that approach, but with a lot of them, it's like, oh, well, I'll learn when I pass. And I'm like, actually, that's not quite how it works. And then I think as well, for me, dealing with parents is the hardest part because like I'm still 23. So a parent is still a parent, right? So if a parent tells me like, but my child's having to go, I'm kind of like, okay, if you say so. It's not smart, but if you say so. Whereas now I'm sort of getting to the point where actually they are paying me for a reason. And part of why they're paying me is also so I can hold them back and be like, no, this isn't it. There are some things that we need to get slightly better at. And then, yeah, that's also a work in progress. Getting comfortable with that. Parents, difficult.
How can you get comfortable with those types of conversations? Have you found a way that makes it easier?
I think doing it more. And then I think as well, I sometimes stick my head in the sand a little bit. And I think where I went wrong a lot of the time was that I sort of waited to the last possible moment to have that conversation. Whereas now that gets brought up in the first lesson that you're here to be a safe driver. I know that that the driving test is the goal, but the goal, first and foremost, before we think about the test, is having you drive safely. So I think sort of getting there a bit earlier, making sure that the learners already at that point understand that that's the standard we're setting, rather than sort of hinting a little bit like a couple weeks before, like maybe you won't be ready, and they're like, okay, but I'll up my lessons, and I'm like, oh, actually, my diary's kind of full. I can't do that. And then it sort of ends up being like a little bit of a shock, and I think that makes it like a bad experience for me as well because then I'm like, oh no, this is exactly what I didn't want to happen. But so yeah, I think sort of getting there a bit earlier, making sure that we have those conversations more frequently, um, and just the fact that they know what's expected of them, I think is a big thing. And doing mock tests early on, even if it's just like 10 minutes, just so that they can sort of see that, actually, I'm not going to book a test yet.
That's something that's come up previously, actually, is doing mock tests routinely through the learning process. So it's not a
Hmm.
full on, like a full driving test, but it's
Yeah.
okay, we've been working on this skill or this topic or this subject, whatever we break our lessons down into. Let's now go
Mm.
and see how you get on your own on this specific thing. So they're used to that kind of almost assessment environment and they're used to
Mm.
just being on their own, making their own decisions.
Yeah. I think I get that a lot with a lot of my learners where they know how to do the right thing, but they have to have my confirmation. And I'm like, but you can do it so well. You are thinking the right thing. Go for it. Worst that will happen is we make a mistake. We'll be fine.
It's certainly a challenge, and I like what you said there about the kind of test situation and setting it out from the beginning and making
Mm.
it about safe driving and not about the driving test. And
Yeah.
I feel we can push students a little too hard because of the test. And it's been a
Mm.
real eye opener recently. Now I've been doing it a little longer and I'm gaining a couple of students from elsewhere. And I can kind of see that they've been pushed because it's like we've got this test looming, let's cram everything in. And I'm finding on
Mm.
lessons we're going back to almost basics and the
Yeah.
beginner skills because there's been little bits missed. And the students seem to prefer that because they're actually seeing the progress. And
Mm.
yeah, having that conversation. I've got one at the moment. They wanted to bring their test forward. And I'm like, look, we're probably best leaving it where it is and let's
Yeah.
get all of these things nailed. And because they're seeing progress in the lessons, we might think it's a little step, but for them, it's massive
Mm.
because they're now doing it on their own. And I've not really my conversations around tests normally come up about midway through training, but I think I'll be getting them in from the beginning. Like, yeah, you can use my car for test, but when we
Mm,
both agree that you're safe and independent.
yeah. And I think probably my age is a bit of a challenge there because a lot of my learners, I think, see me as a bit more of an ally than I need to be. Um, and and that's probably why a lot of parents go on the court at times as well, because I am young and I think that they're probably a bit more like, oh, but Emma, you know what it's like. And yeah, I know what it's like, but we still gotta be safe. My mom, truly, if I tried going for a driving test before I would have been ready to, I'm so sure my mom would have stood in front of that examiner and be like, whatever you do, do not take her out. She is dangerous. Like she would have thrown me under the bus.
I've not had the challenge with parents. I've
Have you
had
not?
conversations with lots of people, and
Mm,
some of the instructors I've spoke to have been older, so they're kind of like the same age as the parents, and they're like, yeah, I guess they talk to me more because we're of a similar age, kind of same generation kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That's why they don't want to talk to me because I'm not quite their age. And then
yeah.
you're getting similar. Maybe it's just the way I'm set up, and I'm like, yeah, I can give you a lesson on this time. Let's get you booked
Yeah.
in. I don't know. I've not had too much of an issue with parents, but I do you use Total Drive?
Yeah.
That's mainly what I use for students, really.
Hmm.
I know you got me thinking now. Why don't parents talk to me?
Yeah, no, I think something I also have gotten a few times has been like if I've had a learner who usually is quite test motivated, and then we're sort of getting to a stage where we're not quite where we want to be. Um, and we've had that chat, then the parent will sort of come on the ball and they'll be like, "Hey, I heard you told my child this today, and I just wanted to know why." And I'm like, "Well, this is why." And I feel so guilty because I'm like, "No," but it's not happened a lot that, and it's usually been with the ones that are very test motivated and maybe not that willing to take responsibility, which I think happens sometimes when you are very test motivated because you're like, oh, but I wouldn't do that on test, or oh, but that was that person's fault. Whereas really, like, it might have been, but could we have done anything differently to make it little and more safe? So I think that especially with the younger ones, I have that. When they're a little bit older, it gets easier again.
I do find I try and teach away from the test now. So I guess that's
Mm,
maybe why I don't get too much of the conversation about being test ready. Obviously, if we've got a test looming
mm,
and we're not ready, there's conversations. But I try and get the message across from the beginning that it's about being safe. It's
yeah.
the test, I feel, from the learning perspective, isn't that relevant early on. It's like
Mm,
if you're safe, you'll pass. And
exactly.
that's the way I try and motivate people. It's not, oh, if you'd have done that on your driving test, it'd have been a fail or it'd have been a driver
Yeah.
fault. It's more, what would have happened if you'd have done that on your own and I wasn't here? And
Mm,
I think that almost has them taking more responsibility for the decisions that they're making.
yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's difficult sometimes because they're all so different. And sometimes
Yes.
things work great with someone, and then other times you try it again and you're like, oh, this is brilliant. I have this down to T. And then the learner just doesn't respond at all. And it's like, why? I thought this was like the golden clue.
This is what
But
I like about the job. There are so many different people, aren't there? And you've got to
mm,
approach different things in so many different ways.
yeah, to be honest, I think for me as well, that has been so beneficial because truly, like, I feel like I've learned more from my learners than I did from my trainer ever. My learners teach me things every single day. And I've even started doing like, if I have a couple of learners that just aren't getting something, I'll get a learner who does get it. And then I'm like, talk to me about that. Why do you get it? What are you thinking as you're going in? And then I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. I can use this. And I think that for me has made a big difference is actually using my learners as the resource that they are, because they're a huge resource. Like they are experts in learning because they're doing it.
I had a really interesting conversation today that I
Mm,
took a huge amount from one of my learners. We was talking before we started recording about spiral roundabouts, and this lad was going onto spiral roundabouts, but some of them were traffic light controlled and some of them weren't. Now,
hmm
most of the people that I teach love it when it's traffic light controlled because they either go or they don't, and it's easy. And he was like, I don't like the ones that are traffic light controlled. Can we find some that aren't? And I'm like,
mm,
okay, why? And he was like, well, not only have I got to think about the roundabout, I've got to think about the lights as well and the stop line. And I'm like, I've learned something. And I said to him, I was like, you've taught me something because I always assumed that people will find it easier. And it
mm.
turns out that not everyone will.
I was like that. Truly, when I was learning to drive, I don't know what was up with me, but red lights, I just wouldn't register. I would know they were there, and then I'd still go. And my mom would be like, red, red. And I truly like only got over that once I passed my test. I don't know what did it because I'd see signs, I'd see all of that, but them traffic lights, that was hard work. Why would they put them out there?
I think that's why it's so important to have that open mind, isn't it? Because yes, we see a lot of learners and we've got a lot
Mm,
of experience with different people in different situations, but someone's always going to be thinking something slightly different to what we're expecting.
yeah, and I love it. I love it so much. I'm like, wow, that is brilliant. And truly, like, I do think as instructors, we should treat them as experts because they are the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that know if I'm making sense or not. And a lot of the time, I don't. Okay. And I need my learners to tell me that. And once they sort of get comfortable with that, or even if they get like playing, I have these toy cars in my car with these laminated like road setups. And once you get them playing with that, it's like, wow, that is so smart. Talk to me about that. I'm like, yes. Oh, I love it.
There is a lot we can learn from them, and it
hmm
keeps it so interesting. And I think that's where coaching can really help instead of telling. If we're
Yeah.
asking, how can you deal with this? How are you feeling when you're dealing with this? I almost feel that I'm not teaching a huge amount because
hmm
they've got the information. Like driving's fairly straightforward when we make it as simple as possible. We're operating the car
Yeah.
and we're following the rules of the road.
hmm
So if they can move the car and they can read the road signs, then they can do most things. But it's all the added
Yeah.
pressures that come into it, isn't it?
Yeah. Coaching is growing on me as well. I did a workshop a couple of weeks back where it was regarding coaching. I have never been a big fan of coaching for two reasons. One of them being that I don't like it done to me, because then I'm like, why are you putting me on the spot like this? That's horrible. Why would I do that to my learners? And then, secondly, I'm a control freak. So, as an instructor, the idea that that coaching conversation can take my learner somewhere where I didn't even think they were going to get, like that scares me. And I sort of went to that workshop and actually came away from it seeing like the benefit of it. And now I've done it more intentionally. I think I've always had like an element of coaching, but I think I've also had a big element of instructing. Whereas now I think I'm finding more of a balance and I'm actually seeing that sometimes when that conversation does go rogue, there's a benefit to that. And I don't have to be controlling everything. Like there's no need. They are young adults. But yeah,
I,
no. So I'm opening my eyes for that. I'm starting to like coaching.
how are you finding it is for you in the lessons using it rather than the instructing?
It's hard, again, especially as someone who does like to control things. And I genuinely do believe I wouldn't ask the question if I didn't know the answer because that would be silly. But I'm sort of just trying to take a step back. One of the things that they said on that workshop was the fact that anyone can teach themselves to drive, we sometimes get a bit in the way. So for me, I'm just trying to keep that in mind that like don't get in the way. And when you don't get in the way, magic happens. Like magic does happen when you don't get in the way. So I think I'm just like intentionally keeping it in mind and also keeping the silence, which to me has been really difficult because I hate the silence myself. But again, if you just sit in it, first of all, you're going to get more comfortable with it as you go. And then, second of all, that's where the magic happens. And they'll be like, oh, I don't know. And then you give them like a minute, and all of a sudden they know everything. And it's like, wow, okay, you go. Look at you.
I find it makes it a lot easier because it's their way of doing things. And at times I'm like, they could be doing this on their own. Again, I've got another student at the moment who goes out practicing in his own car. But what
Mm,
he's had is they're not really helping him learn his driving. They're just kind of in the car and it's like, take us to the shops, take us here, take us there. So our lessons have been very much what happened there? What can
mm,
you do differently? How can you notice it? And the last lesson we had, I was like, look, you're going to tell me when things haven't gone quite as you expected. And that way
mm,
you can develop yourself in your own car, even though your supervising driver isn't really teaching you. And he was like, yeah, that'd be
mm.
great. So we drove for about half an hour, him correcting everything himself. And I'm like, right, go and practice that for a week. And let's see how your driving is when you get back next week. And he was like, "Oh, I can't
Yeah.
wait." So it's yeah, I'm hoping he can teach himself to drive.
No, honestly, it has been so incredible, and I do see the benefit. And I think another thing for me with coaching was the fact that I felt like it was a little bit slower than actual instructing, which it can be, but it's only slower because it might take them longer to get what you're telling them. Whereas with the coaching, it takes a little bit longer to sort of reflect upon it, but once they get it, they get it. So even though the process feels a little bit longer, it's actually way quicker. It is so efficient. And again, as someone who likes to think of my learners as experts, that's where you see their expertise. Listen to them, let them do their thing. Like, that's so cool. I love it.
We've taken a bit of a turn, haven't we? And gone to
We have
coaching.
deuces.
I love it. It's hopefully it will help people as well because what you've said there, it seems like it's taking longer, the coaching.
Hmm.
And it comes back to what you were saying about the cost and maybe think people think we're just doing it for the money. And the coaching at the
Hmm.
beginning does seem to take longer. And we might be sat there thinking, am I giving value for money? But then as it
Yeah.
progresses, things just start to click and shoot up and they're developing their own driving much quicker
Yeah.
than we could teach them something.
No, exactly. And that is so cool. And again, as someone who wasn't quite sold on the coaching, I'm getting there. Slowly but surely, but I'm getting there.
We'll have to do another follow-up episode on Emma's coaching.
Literally, my boyfriend gets so annoyed sometimes because we'll like have a little tiff or whatever. And I'm like, talk to me about that. How did that make you feel? And he's like, stop it. But, it has its benefit in all areas of life.
Yeah, I can see how that can end up at some points.
Yeah, he sometimes tells me to take off my instructor hat, but you know what? That's harder than it sounds.
It makes so much sense once you start doing it though, and it's applicable in so many places, apart from when my children are doing something that I've told them not to do.
That makes sense. I get that.
Then it goes out of the window and I'm back to telling and instructing.
No one's perfect.
So what we can talk about now, if you wouldn't mind, you
Mhm.
took a jump and went independent amidst your ADI
Crisis.
blues and everything else that you had going on. How did
Yeah.
you find that and why did you make that decision?
So I made that decision, first and foremost, because I felt very lonely in my franchise. I was the only person in my area. And I was sort of paying for something that I was pretty sure I could do myself. So I was like, you know what? I might as well take the leap. My goal is to be like the best trainer there is one day. So I might as well get a school so that, in 5 years I can be like, well, wanna be trained by me. I have a franchise option. Um, and I sort of just decided that there's no time like today. And I was initially thinking I was going to stay under someone for 2 years. But as I sort of got grooving, I was like, but you know what? People are recommending me, not the school. So why not have them recommend me in my school? So I just thought, you know what? We need more cute logos out there, more cute driving schools. And I just wanted something that was mine. I think, especially having like left Norway, having something that's all mine has been like a big deal. So I'm like, no, that's all mine. This is my school. I'm doing what I want with it.
How did you find setting it up?
Easier than I thought, to be honest. I thought it would be like a whole process, but realistically, all I needed to do was text PADI or whatever, and just let them know that actually I'm trading under this name. The logo was quite easy. When I was going through names, I think that was the hardest part. So I would go on Instagram with my friends and I'd be like, oh, these are the options that I have. And my friends would be like, that is silly. Like, do not do that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a bit humbling. And then I sort of went back and forth a couple of times and I was like, no, I like that name. And I could see the vision. I could see like in 5 years people knowing my school, and I was like, that's what I want them to know. And sort of had to get the logo, the stickers. Apart from that, it was really straightforward. Website was easy. That's I have a man in IT, so he has connections. Everything was just quite easy when it came to setting it up. It was the actual doing it that was hard. That was hard.
What was hard about that?
I think specifically setting my own boundaries. I like the fact that when I was with the franchise, I could fall back on their T's and C's and be like, but that's not me, that's the school. Like, I wouldn't do things this way. Whereas now, this is how I want things done, and that's how I need things done. Um, and then also honoring that. That's hard. That's really, really hard. And sort of, yeah, knowing that everything was going to fall back on me, big deal. But I think it also like motivates me more because I'm now working hard for my school. It's gonna be rewarding to me because it is me. So, so I think specifically like cancellation policy, payments and stuff. But I told you that last time as well. That's something I struggle with a little bit. And then I was sort of getting out of the mindset of being very nice. And when I started independent, I was all of a sudden very nice again. So learning curve, steep, steep learning curve.
Have you managed to get used to that now, the sticking to your terms and conditions?
I don't know if I've gotten used to it or if I just have an amazing batch of learners. Because truly, my learners at the moment, there are no issues with them. They are so easy to deal with. And I don't know if maybe, I think I'm more strict with it in like the beginning and especially like first lesson. I go through them quite thoroughly. Um, but yeah, to be honest, it's been a breeze. That part's been a breeze. Had a few like just in the very beginning, but now they're fabulous. All of them are fabulous. I have such a nice batch at the moment.
Do you think that's made it easier going through all that information on the first lesson?
Yeah. And I think as well, because I use Total Drive, so I sort of expected them all to read through terms and conditions because I am a terms and conditions reader. Everything that I download, I read the terms and conditions with, but not everyone does. So I sort of expected them to read through, and then when they'd be a bit shocked, I'd be a bit shocked because I was like, "But you've consented to this. Like you had to do that." So now that I actually talk to them about it, and what I try to do is make it like a conversation. Like I don't just read off of the paper. I explain why it is the way it is, like why my payment policy is the way it is, or why my cancellation policy is. And I think once they sort of understand that, they're like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. She's not just trying to be horrible. There's a reason for it. So I think maybe I've made small changes when it comes to that, but I do think I just have lovely learners at the moment. They're fine.
That's something that I could take something from, is the going through why and
Mm,
setting it out at the beginning. Generally, I expect them to read my terms and conditions on Total Drive, but I do
yeah.
send what I think people want to know, and that is the payment policy and the cancellation
Mm,
policy always get sent over before they're loaded into Total Drive. So they know that it's
yeah.
48 hours notice and payment needs to be at least 48 hours before. I'm quite
Mm,
flexible with the first one, but that's
yeah.
generally where it's like, look, I'm going to let you off this time, but I can't fill the space. I don't get paid.
Mm,
So we're going to have to stick to the terms and conditions if there's a short
yeah.
notice cancellation again. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we're a business, but it's quite personal until they've passed
Yeah.
their driving test, and then you don't hear off them again. It's an interesting dynamic that I still think I'm trying to get used to, because I want to help people. I want to give them the best that I can, but I've got a mortgage to pay.
No, exactly. And I think that's the big thing as well, because fair enough if it was only affecting me, but it doesn't. Like it affects everything because it is a business. It's not a charity. And sometimes that's a bit hard to sort of understand, and especially if there's a learner who usually hasn't been a problem, or they're like lovely on their lesson but they just keep canceling last minute, and then you're like, oh, they're really nice and I really want to get them through, and I know things aren't necessarily easy at home, and then I'm just like, oh, I'm just gonna let them know. But you can't do that. Like that doesn't help anyone actually. Which I think has been a bit hard for me because I've always been like, "Oh, well, it helps them out if I don't charge," but actually it doesn't because it causes an issue almost every single time further down the line.
Another difficult task to try and manage as a business. And I'm guessing you didn't have that when you was part of a franchise, because you could just look, these are their terms and conditions. I have to
Mm.
stick to it. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you're
No,
just
I
going to have
think
to pretend that it's not your school and be like, no, it's another Emma that owns it and she made these rules.
my boss is horrible. No, but I feel like it's the same thing as like when I was a teenager and stuff, and someone was like, "Oh, do you want to come for a sleepover?" And then I'd text my mom and be like, "Hey, mom, can you please say that I can't?" And that's a bit what I have done with the terms and conditions in the past. But I'm 23 now. I need to start acting my age, but it's hard. It's so hard.
I think that's another one that with time and doing it becomes
Mm,
a little bit easier. I mean, there have been times where it's I've got to the end of the month and it's like I'd be doing all right this month if it wasn't for the handful of cancellations that I've had over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And then you look
yeah,
at the numbers, and I mean, I don't know if you do it, but I tend to go through, not disciplined, but every now and then I'll go through and look at how many cancellations I've had, and whether they were paid, whether they wasn't. And it soon adds up if we're not charging for cancellations. And it's a big chunk of
absolutely.
money.
Yeah, it really is. And I actually had the other day, which probably saved me a little bit in that scenario, because I had a learner who hadn't paid, and I didn't want to say anything because I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then she texted me. She was like, "Hey, I forgot to pay you last week. Why didn't you tell me?" I was like, "Oh, I just figured, I don't know what's going on." And she was like, "Shout at me. What the hell?" I was like, "Okay." And that was like such a breath of fresh air, because I always feel like I'm sort of pestering them, but sometimes it does just come down to the fact they have other things going on. It's not malicious. They just forget. And I was like, oh, how nice to have someone who's like, hello, hold me to my standards. It's lovely. I was like, okay, I will next time.
Do you think we can sometimes take it too personal? And we're like, I don't want to ask them because they might have things going on. And we're
Mm,
almost, like, we're a business. They know we're a business. So
yeah.
sometimes we have to act like one.
Yeah. And I think that's hard as well, especially probably with my age, that I am quite on par with them. So I think sometimes being like a business and being just me can be a difficult balance because I feel like with older instructors, they sort of come into it more like, okay, well this is an adult teaching me. Whereas I'm not as adult. I'm I'm a them. Like I'm part of them. Like they'll see me out when I'm out and I think we're just at a similar stage in life. So I think that sometimes makes it a little bit harder. Or maybe that's just an excuse that I use. It could be either.
It's a great way to justify it to yourself.
Yeah, it is actually.
It's difficult. And like I've been independent from day one. So I've been
Mm,
independent for over, well, nearly 4 years now. And it's been one of my biggest challenges is figuring out exactly that. It's like when people haven't paid, at what point do I
mm.
remind them? And
Yeah,
I'm not great with admin, in all honesty. So there'll be times where I'm messaging them, can you pay for the driving lesson that you've got coming up tomorrow? And I'm sat there thinking, I hope they don't cancel because they've not
yeah,
paid. And it's going to be a really awkward message if I'm like, well, I'm sorry you've had to cancel, but I still need you to send payment. And I do have Total
yeah.
Drive sends a message 48 hours before, please arrange payment for your lesson on this day at this time.
Mhm.
It's um it's difficult. And
It
I
is.
do often have to just remind myself that it's a business. And you mentioned it, I think, a while ago about it's not just about getting as much money out of people as we can. And I do
Yeah.
sometimes think that maybe people think that of us. And that's just my opinion. That's just in my head that people think
No,
that.
I agree.
But the other side of that is how many messages are we getting every day, every week of students that
Yeah.
want driving lessons?
No, exactly. And I think especially I struggle a lot with the fact that like, oh, another instructor could probably do this in 30 hours. Whereas I sometimes will be at 40 hours and I'm like, I am the worst driving instructor. Like, how am I spending 40 hours with this learner, right? And I think that's one of those things where sometimes learners will come in and they're like, oh, my friend passed in 20 hours. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. I really don't. And sort of that's something where I'm like, what if they think I'm just after their money? What if they just think that? Then I'd be very sad.
It's interesting that you say that. I had one that, and I think is where coaching really helps with that. I had one young lad and he had just shy of 10 hours with me, and
Mm,
he didn't go on and pass after 10 hours of training with me. So I'm not that
yeah.
good. But he had about 10 hours, and I was like, look, there's not a lot that I can help with. He was having private practice between lessons, and he
Mm,
was a confident lad that just picked everything up really quick. So he had 10 hours
yeah.
with me, went off practicing in his own car, and I got a message a couple of months later. Hi, Josh, just letting you know that I've just passed my driving test with however many driving faults. Thanks for your help. Now that's someone that is going to tell their friend, I only had 10 hours and passed my driving test. In
Yeah.
reality, that lad, he'd had 30 to 40 hours
Mm,
when he was learning with me. He had the 10 hours with me and he was out pretty much every day in his own car. And then he had
yeah.
2 or 3 months of being out every day in his own car. So he must have racked up over 100 hours of practice before going for his
Hmm.
driving test. But on the flip side of it, I only had 10 hours with a driving instructor. So there are two
Yeah.
sides to that coin as well.
Absolutely. To be fair, I have a learner like that at the moment. She is a sponge and a half. I have never ever seen anyone learn that fast. And like she does so many things naturally. It is shocking. I will tell her something little, right? And she will take on it. And then all of a sudden, I asked her to do a parallel park and she did a perfect one. She was like, was that sort of it? I was like, That was exactly it. Like she just does everything. And I remember when we first started, she told me, she was like, I hate the biting point. I've tried the biting point. I hate it. I don't get along with it. By our second lesson, so she had had 2 hours for first lesson, then we went over to an hour and a half. By our second lesson, she was doing roundabouts quite independently. And she didn't have a car at the time, but what she had done is she had taken her boyfriend and made him act like her pedals. So she physically had him sit with his hands, and that's how she learned about the clutch and the biting point. And I think he had like something where she could learn steering and stuff. And she's awesome. I have never seen anyone that motivated. It is crazy. Everything you tell her, she's like, okay, I'll do it. Now she has a car at home too. It is easy breezy. I'm like, yeah, look at me. This is fast.
They're the extremes, aren't they? You do get some people, like my student and yours, where they're just going to pick it up really quick. And
Mm,
I think that's part of the problem of this. My friend learned in 10 hours. They've got loads of friends that have
exactly.
learned to drive, but the one that stands out is the one person that's done it in 5 hours, or the one that it
Yeah.
took 100 hours. Yeah, my other friend needed 100 hours. Is it going to take me that long? I don't know. We'll find out when
Yeah.
we get to hour 99.
Mm,
But people pick the extremes and that's what they want to do. If he's done it or if she's done it, I can do it. So are
yeah.
you prepared to put in the same amount of work that they have?
No, exactly. And that's the thing. And I feel like very often when they have had very few hours with an instructor, it is because they've done a ton of work at home. Or like even I remember when I was little and my dad would like have me on his lap and I would steer the car and stuff like that. Even that like makes a difference. You can always tell when there's a learner who has been in a car before, even if they've not done that much, even if it's just them like being able to change gears for their parents, right? You can always tell. And just those little things, that is practice. It doesn't have to be that they've driven. Those little things will help you out.
I'm I'm setting my eldest daughter up at the minute. She's 11, but she's going to pass her driving
Right?
test about 3 days after her 17th birthday
Yes, I love that.
because I have to pick her up every other weekend. And when we're driving, I'm like, oh, look at what that car's doing. Look what this car's
Mm.
doing. That car's going to get in the wrong lane. She's looking at me like I'm an idiot. I'm like, I'm saving myself a fortune in time that I need to put in that I could be doing driving lessons because you'll already know it all.
100%. And truly, you can always tell when parents have done that. Honestly, always. Even like the judgment and stuff on some learners, just because parents have been like, what's that person going to do? And then they just know. It's amazing.
It works both ways, doesn't it? If they've got a parent that's a fast driver that is always
Mm,
in a rush places. I've had
yeah.
a
Angry
lot of
parent.
interesting, yeah, a lot of interesting conversations with students about that when I'm looking at some of the
Mm,
decisions that are made. I'm like, who do you watch driving? How do they
yeah.
drive? And they're, oh yeah, yeah. They drive really fast. They drive too close to cars in front. I'm like, what are we doing? And then it's like,
Mm.
oh yeah, that's what I'm doing as well. So it is really
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned that and how people can pick it up from such a young age.
Yeah. It's so cool. And honestly, I was so lucky with my parents and probably being from a little village in Norway where we didn't have that much police, to be honest. Like we did a lot of dodgy stuff, but it made us good drivers.
It's needed, isn't it? That awareness. And I do feel fairly confident that when my children can drive,
Mm,
they're not going to be just crammed through driving lessons, hope that they pass a driving test and away they go. They're going to
yeah.
be aware and looking around and spotting people that are making mistakes because
Hmm.
that's the hardest bit. Like, if we're being honest, it's not controlling the car and staying between some white lines. It's what's everyone else
Hmm.
doing and how are we going to keep ourselves safe?
Yeah. Yeah, I do that a lot where I'm like, everyone's your enemy, drive like they are. And then they sort of start seeing things a little bit more. And it's actually very interesting that just something that little can have them think that differently. It's cool. I love it. That and driving detective. I love driving detective. Great game.
Driving detective. You're going to have to expand on that.
Well, so basically, it is just taking the clues that are coming from around you. So, being a driving detective, like just seeing all those little clues, what are clues that are quite realistic that might develop? What is just a little clue, but it will be okay? Or what was a clue and now it probably isn't relevant anymore? And when they sort of do look for those clues, because I normally say, like, okay, we'll do this for 5 minutes. Try to find me 10 clues. 10 clues in 5 minutes. That's not, no one gets that many clues. And then they'll come back and actually it was a lot of clues. And they're like, ooh, that's a lot of clues in a short time. I'm like, yeah, think about that when you go on a 1 hour long journey. So that I find is really, really efficient for a lot of them. Sometimes it messes a little bit with our general awareness because they're only looking for clues. But once you can sort of get that settled, it's great. Makes them really aware.
It has saved me a few times with my driving, kind of being
Hmm.
aware of what people are likely to do before they even know that they're going to do it. And I'm not talking
Yeah.
about my learners, but me driving and avoiding people that just don't, I don't know what it is. It's like that sixth sense. They're not looking where they should be looking. And then the
Hmm.
mistake plays out. Yeah, that's the hardest thing I think with driving is, like you said, everyone else.
Yeah. I remember that in Norway once, actually. Speaking of that sixth sense, I was driving down this long country road and literally probably drove that every single day. And it was dark. And then before one of the sharp turns, I just, for some reason, felt like I need to slow down a bit. And I slowed down. And as I came around the corner, there were like three deers that ran across the road. And I was like, wow, thank God I followed my gut there. That's something I stress with my learners. I'm like, there's a reason you get that gut feeling. Trust it.
It's crazy how things work out.
Yeah. There's been a few of those where I've been like, wow, how did I know that? Should I start charging for this? Being so psychic.
I'm not sure whether I mentioned it or whether I think I've mentioned it on one of the episodes, but I had it on a lesson.
Mm,
I stopped the student going at a mini roundabout. It's a four-way mini roundabout. We was going straight ahead. The car opposite, everything, oh, well, they wasn't signaling, so they was going straight
mm,
ahead. But something didn't sit right. And I got the student to stop at the give way line and she went right, but she wasn't indicating to go right.
yeah.
And I don't know what it was. And afterwards, I was kind of thinking about it, and I knew she had children in the back. She was distracted, and
Mm,
going where we come from was onto an estate. Going to her left was onto another estate, but going right was going towards a school. And I was just
yeah.
like, she's probably going to the school. She's got kids in the back. She's not concentrating. Things aren't going well for her on this day. So I was like, just let's stop here. And away she went off to the right
Yeah.
with no indicator. And at the time, I couldn't figure out why that had happened. It was afterwards where I was like, I, I was assessing and something didn't sit right. And whether it was
Yeah.
I'd noticed what was going on or whether it was just that sixth sense, just let's give her a minute and see what she does.
I think that is so cool though. Or like when you're doing like a Q&A or whatever, and then you're like, what could this person do? And then they do it, and the learner's like, did you plan that? And I'm like, no, actually. But that was kind of cool.
I like the ones when we're on country roads and it's like,
Mm,
maybe we should slow down for this bend in case there's a lorry coming around the other way. And they're like, but there's never lorries around here. Then there's a lorry
mm.
coming around. You're like, there is today.
Yeah. There could always be. No, I think
That's the
that's so
difficulty with
interesting.
driving as well, isn't it? That you get your routine. And it's like no one ever comes out of
Mm,
this junction. And that's something I'm quite passionate about with the students. It's like we might take this route 100, 1,000 times, and no one ever comes out. One day someone will, and
yeah.
it'll be an accident.
No, exactly. And that's the thing, like, I think even back to like mistakes that I've made, even now, where I'm like, actually, that was pure luck that that didn't go bad. And everyone does that. You can be as experienced as you want to be. Everyone will make those mistakes. And sort of then having the knowledge to at least when you make a mistake, you know you have the good routines and the good habits in. because I'm not gonna lie, if I ever do something silly and end up in a crash because I had a bad habit, that will eat me up. I will struggle with that.
That's always a talking point in my car. Was it planned or did we get away with it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one, actually. That's a really good one. I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
It comes up a lot on the lesson because obviously we know our areas and we
Mm,
know what we can see and we know what the safe distance is and things like that. So I'll be watching my pupil and they won't have checked at the junction. I've checked, I know it's clear, but they've not. And
yeah.
it's like, did you see what was coming? I forgot to check. It's like, right, let's pull up. What happens if we forget to check? And then we'll look at some junctions and kind of what could happen. What's the outcome
Mm,
of forgetting to check on one junction? And once we've done
yeah.
the serious point of it, of the outcome and the danger, then I'm like, that's why on a driving test, people will fail. And
Mm,
it's not because there was someone there, but you don't know whether there was someone there or not. And it's not because it's just a
yeah.
fail on a driving test, it's because someone could get killed.
Exactly. I find that so interesting as well. I had a learner today actually. And we've struggled with roundabouts and specifically lane discipline, and it's sort of been a little bit all over the place. And we have talked and talked and talked about this, and we have demonstrated, we have watched videos, and nothing sort of made it click. And then today we were approaching a roundabout, and someone was in the left-hand lane, and it only has two exits. So someone was in the left-hand lane, other guy was in the right-hand lane to go right. And then this guy is fully going left, and then all of a sudden cuts into the right-hand lane, truly like centimeters from the other car. And my learner was like, "Oh, did you see that?" I was like, "Yeah, that's great actually, because this is what could happen to us." And we probably had the best roundabout lesson we've ever had. But that was what it took, like actually seeing it in real life and not just on video. Because I think sometimes on video, some of them are a bit like, oh, but that's not really gonna happen. That's just a video. But it's like, well, how do you think those videos came to life? Someone did it and it went wrong. And I think that's very, very interesting. I love it when they have those. It's like, aha.
I think that can link to what was briefly mentioned about when we was talking about the driving test, and it's all right, I'll learn
Mm,
once I've passed. And that's what a lot of people used to be told. You don't learn to drive until you've passed your driving test. And it's like, do we want to leave it until we have a collision to learn that maybe we shouldn't go around the corners so fast? Like, why
yeah,
are we leaving it to that stage? Why are we leaving it to it's dangerous to learn when we can learn now? And those situations that happen on the road are great because they're real,
mm,
aren't they? They've seen it in front of them and how close it was to a collision. And the
yeah,
scary part is half the time the drivers aren't even aware of what they've done.
exactly. And that is so interesting. And then even being like, okay, well, if you were driving then, do you think you would have been aware? Have you ever been in a situation where you've done that? And they'll be like, yeah, actually, I think I have. And it's like, isn't that kind of scary? And they're like, yeah, it is scary. And just, oh, that's where the magic happens. I love those moments. When things click for them, it is just beautiful. And sometimes it can be like the smallest thing. Like I've literally gone in with the scaries and the statistics and all of that, and nothing falls in, and then something little can happen, and they're like, "Oh, I get it now." I'm like, "Oh, that's all it took."
Does that come back to coaching?
Probably a little bit, yes. This is probably where the benefit of the coaching comes in, because, and honestly, like I do think that because for me, a super scary example might not have the same effect as on other learners. For example, with tailgating, tailgating to me makes my heart beat. I am terrified. Whenever I get too close to someone, I'm like, oh my God, Lord help me. Whereas my learners will be like, oh, but it's a dual carriageway. They won't slam their brakes. And I'm like, ah. But what if they do? but but sometimes what's scary to me isn't scary enough for them.
I had a really scary incident on the motorway years ago. Not exactly slamming my brakes on because it wouldn't have made
Mm,
any difference, but there was a car broken down with a trailer on the back, and I couldn't see the brake lights. I could just see the red lights, and it's at night, pitch black.
Mm,
And before I know it, I've not realized that the vehicle stopped on
yeah.
the inside lane, and I'm going down at 70 miles an hour. And the only thing that saved me that day was knowing that there was nothing in the middle lane next to me and I could swerve around
Mm,
it because I wouldn't have stopped in time. So I
no.
did brake, but I also had to move. So it comes back to that being aware of what's going on around you at all times. And yeah,
Hmm.
sometimes people do have to slam the brakes on a dual carriageway because we don't know what's going on ahead.
Yeah. No, exactly. And just because you've not seen it yet doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means you've not seen it. Lucky you. What happens the day you do see it?
And if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have so many casualties and collisions on the road, especially on motorways. Like
Mm,
we're staying between white lines going down a motorway.
yeah.
And
I find that
uh,
so interesting. Oh, continue. Sorry.
and I was just gonna say, you can go for it. Just like, and I'm thinking about my time. Could I have done anything different? Probably. But the
Mm,
only reason it wasn't a collision was because the middle lane was clear.
yeah. That is so interesting because I don't know if you get it, but I have a lot of learners who are like, oh, but you're a great driver. But actually, it's not that I'm a great driver. I'm very aware. I sometimes I'm a lucky driver. You can be the best driver in the world and still just be a lucky driver at times. Everyone makes those mistakes. I've had that on the dual carriageway as well, where someone was stopped. It was actually on a lesson as well. And I think it was her first time on a dual carriageway, which didn't make it any better. But someone was stopped. And I sort of realized that the last moment, and it was a bit of a shit, shit, shit. And I think that's exactly what I told my learner, just shit, shit, shit. And she was a bit like, huh? I was like, he stopped. And we sort of ended up getting past. And truly, the only reason that was okay was because no one was next to us. It didn't have anything to do with skill. I completely failed as a driving instructor. Shit, shit, shit is not going to help anyone. But that was the only thing I could think because we were going so fast. And I don't think you realize how quick 70 miles per hour is until someone's at standstill in front of you. That is scary. But we got through it. But again, it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I'm a good driver. It was pure luck.
And I do often think with things like that, could we have done anything different in the build up
Mm,
to it? Could we have seen the signs? I could have, because the lights were getting closer and the road was fairly straight. But again,
yeah.
it was late at night. And I think it comes back to a lot of other things with driving, but was I tired? Was I paying as much attention as I could have been? How long had I been
Mm,
driving for? Was I getting complacent because it's a straight road and I've just got to stay between the white lines? There's so many factors
yeah.
that come into it. And we've got to be aware of that and help our learners develop that in themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's most important to me is the fact that I want them to be able to reflect. Whenever a learner's like, I wouldn't do that because I'm a good driver. I'm like, okay, but are you always a good driver? What happens if you had a late night out or you're just going to Tesco and you do it every single day? What happens in those moments? No one's great 100% of the time. You might not feel tired, but you will be. And I love it when they're able to like reflect. If a mistake happens and they're like, oh, I could have done that differently. Actually, I knew that was going to happen. And it's like, okay, that's beautiful. Let's go do it again.
It's good when we see those things and the student makes a decision. I had a
Mm,
student, he was pretty much test ready, and a lorry flew in front of us on one of our spiral roundabouts, the multi-lane roundabouts here, that it's you can get up some speed on the roundabout. And it was a week or
mm,
two before his test, lorry flies out in front of him, doesn't stop, just cracks on. And the student straight on the brakes, no messing around, emergency stop. And I'm like, wow, you beat me to the brake. And he was like, well, what were
yeah,
my other options? I was like, there wasn't really. He was like, well, what about the
yeah.
cars behind? I'm like, well, what about the lorry in front of us?
No, exactly. I've had that as well, actually, when the learner got there before me on the brakes, which was actually silly because I'd seen the hazard and I knew it was going to happen. but for some reason she reacted to it quicker, and she hadn't actually seen the lead up to it. I'd seen the lead up, and she only saw when it happened, and she slammed her brakes. I was literally a centimeter from the brake when she did. I was like, wow, those are some reflexes. Well done, you. And then I feel like a little bit like, oh, probably not my best moment. But then I'm also like so impressed. I'm like, wow, thank God you were functioning because I wasn't. I think that's nice for them as well when they sort of do have those moments where it's like, actually, I handled that.
It's so rare though, isn't it, that we have those things. I mean, I can probably think of a handful of times that that's happened, and I spend
Mm,
all day, every day on the road. And it
yeah.
takes a lot of variables to line up for it to lead to something serious. And I think
Mm,
that's why it can sometimes get downplayed. It's like we know that if the situation was slightly different, there would have been a
mm,
collision. But the student's like, yeah, but it wasn't. So it's always like, yeah, but what if that car was going
yeah.
faster or they'd have left their house 3 seconds earlier? How would this situation have played out? And I
Mm,
think a lot of drivers get away with a lot of things and don't realize. But we can talk about drivers and learning. I think there's been a lot that's been covered today about
yeah.
your qualifying and going independent. But I do have some final questions if we can go through some of them for me, please.
Do it.
So, the first one, can you tell me
Mm,
what car you would drive if it was the only car you could drive forever?
mm. A G-Wagon. Mercedes G-Wagon. That is my dream car. I have to have one. I don't even care if like I can't drive it. If I could just have it on my driveway, amazing. Then I'll be like, that's mine.
Straight in there with that answer. Nice as well. Would that just be for you? It'd be good to teach him one of them. You wouldn't be worried about everyone else at that point.
True, but I think I'd get like a little bit protective because like that's my G-Wagon. Don't touch my G-Wagon. I think even my partner, I'd be like, no, no, you can look at us, but you can't touch.
What a great answer. The next one, can you tell me if you could deliver a driving lesson to anyone, who would it be?
Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber, 100%. Justin Bieber is my first husband. He doesn't know it, but he is. And I even have on my keychain a Justin Bieber. So all my learners are always like, oh, is that Justin Bieber? And that is truly because if I have him in the car with me, I'll be okay. I don't think it would be my best work at all, but I would want to teach Justin Bieber. I reckon he could get good at his mirrors.
Nice answer. Can you tell me the best advice you ever received?
Best advice I've ever received is to, like I said, with the coaching, that we get in the way. So get out of the way and observe more than control. That tends to do the trick. But I think it's like it's actually kind of an obvious thing when you think about it to just get out of the way. But when you're in a car, it's not the natural thing to do. So I think that's the best advice. It was so simple and it's just it works.
Nice. Can you tell me your favorite book?
Highway Code. I love the Highway Code. It's the only book that I read. I think I've like read Harry Potter when I was like in fourth grade, but Highway Code I enjoy. I really enjoy the Highway Code.
That's the first time that's come up, I think, as a favorite book. But what we'll do for anyone who wants to have a look at what the Highway Code is, we'll leave the link in the description.
Absolutely. I love that.
Can you tell me one message you would give to someone who's considering becoming a driving instructor?
And don't believe everything they say. Everyone's trying to sell the dream. It's not a dream unless you make it. Like, I truly now feel like I am living the dream, but that's after at least a year of something quite close to like a nightmare. I'm living the dream now because I've decided to make it a dream. But everyone's like, oh, you can make so much money and you don't have to work. That's not true. It is not true. Don't believe them. It's hard work.
That is one of my favorite things when I see it advertised. You can make X amount of money working the hours that you want to work. And I'm like, no, no, no. You don't get both. You get one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. And thing is, I do think the job has a lot of potential, but it has to be seen as potential. I think it's being sold as like a definite, and that's not the case. And if you come in and that's what you've been sold, you're going to be disappointed. Very disappointed.
That's a great answer. Can you tell me one piece of advice you would give a student before they go for their driving test?
I give a lot. Eat a banana. I think I tell that to everyone because apparently that works really well. And then I always have them make a playlist. I think that is the most efficient advice I give is to have a playlist. I very often find, especially if someone's failed like their first test and then they go into the second one with a playlist, that does make a difference. And that is probably the advice that I would want to hear. I love some music in the background.
I try and get a lot of mine with their own playlist, but as a
Mm,
minimum, we tend to have the radio on and just something to not have them overthinking the
yeah.
situations that are going on.
No, exactly. And I think that's the thing about tests because it's so stressful, bless them. I know that even for my part three. And just sort of having something familiar, such as music, because you're gonna have those like positive associations with it. And why wouldn't you want to bring that into your driving test? And everyone is shocked. Everyone's like, "Oh, I can do that." I'm like, "Yes, of course you can do it." I love that.
Great answer. Can you tell me something you wish you were better at?
Oh, a lot. I wish I was better at coaching at the moment, but I'm working hard on that. And then I actually wish I was a little bit better at being a little bit gentler to myself. I think I set the standards very high sometimes, and very often I feel like I'm the only person in the world who struggles with this. And it was so lovely because I went to a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and someone there was feeling a lot of the things that I've been feeling. And I was like, wow, that is so good to hear that like I'm not the only one who's drowning. And I think I think that's the thing to just like be gentle and everyone goes through it. Everyone goes through it at one point, and there will be other people who are there. Don't let your pride get in the way. Don't be like me.
Great, honest answer there. That's the last one of those questions. The last one now.
Oh, lovely.
Can you
Mhm.
share any final messages and give us some information if anyone wants to find you kind of on your socials or if they want to reach out for kind of any advice? How can we do that?
Well, so I'm very active on Facebook in the nice groups where there's not so much abuse. So if you ever see me on Facebook, feel free to message. I might not have a lot of experience under my belt, but I think a lot of it is just being human because we're humans dealing with humans. And you don't have to be the best instructor in the world to know what a human goes through. And then you can find me on Instagram on Emma Brufo or Wheelwise Emma. And I use that a lot, actually. So do follow.
We will make sure that we get all of the socials linked in the description so people can get to you.
Super.
But Emma, it has been a pleasure chatting with you again and hearing
It
how you've
always
got
is.
on since your
Oh,
PDI days.
I love when I get to yap.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely.